The champagne fountain sparkled under crystal chandeliers, casting fractured light across 200 faces who'd paid $10,000 each to attend the Sterling Foundation Gala. Amanda Sterling stood at the center of it all in her custom Valentino gown, the kind of dress that cost more than most people's cars, holding a champagne flute she hadn't sipped from. She was 23, beautiful in that effortless way money polishes into perfection, and completely unaware that in exactly 4 minutes, a 7-year-old girl with chocolate cake on her fingers would destroy her father's empire. The girl, Rosa, had wandered from the children's wing where wealthy parents stashed their kids during adult events. Drawn by the music and lights, she held a slice of cake on a paper plate, her foster mother's borrowed dress 2 sizes too big, secured with safety pins hidden under a cardigan. When Rosa stumbled on the marble steps, the cake flew forward in a perfect arc, landing with a wet smack across Amanda's chest, smearing dark frosting down $6,000 of ivory silk. The ballroom inhaled as one. What Amanda did next would cost her father $4 billion, shatter 2 families, and reveal a secret that would make tomorrow's headlines scream. But in that frozen moment, with chocolate dripping onto Italian marble, nobody knew they were watching the beginning of the end. If you want to see how one split-second decision can destroy everything someone built over 30 years, make sure you're subscribed. Because what happens next will make you question everything you think you know about power, revenge, and the price of being human. The champagne fountain sparkled under crystal chandeliers, casting fractured light across 200 faces who'd paid $10,000 each to attend the Sterling Foundation Gala. Amanda Sterling stood at the center of it all in her custom Valentino gown, the kind of dress that cost more than most people's cars, holding a champagne flute she hadn't sipped from. She was 23, beautiful in that effortless way money polishes into perfection, and completely unaware that in exactly 4 minutes, a 7-year-old girl with chocolate cake on her fingers would destroy her father's empire. The girl, Rosa, had wandered from the children's wing where wealthy parents stashed their kids during adult events. Drawn by the music and lights, she held a slice of cake on a paper plate, her foster mother's borrowed dress 2 sizes too big, secured with safety pins hidden under a cardigan. When Rosa stumbled on the marble steps, the cake flew forward in a perfect arc, landing with a wet smack across Amanda's chest, smearing dark frosting down $6,000 of ivory silk. The ballroom inhaled as one. Amanda felt the frosting slide down the boning of her bodice, cold and wet against her skin. Rosa stood frozen, the empty paper plate trembling in her hands, her face crumpling in that particular way. Children's faces crumple when they know they've done something terrible and can't take it back. Around them, the carefully orchestrated evening stopped breathing. Violins held their notes. Conversations died mid-sentence. Camera phones rose like a field of glowing flowers, everyone wanting to capture the moment the Sterling Heiress finally showed her true colors. Because that's what they were all waiting for, wasn't it? Amanda could feel their anticipation, that electric hunger for her to become exactly who they'd always assumed she was. The spoiled princess, the entitled brat, the girl who'd thrown a crystal glass at a server last year, except she hadn't, but the tabloids printed it anyway. And truth matters less than narrative when you're born into money that predates your great-grandparents. Across the ballroom, her father, Richard Sterling, stood talking with Viktor Kozlov, the Russian developer whose partnership would be finalized tomorrow morning. Richard's signature on that contract meant $4 billion, meant expansion into international markets, meant cementing the Sterling name in the kind of wealth that transcends generations. Amanda had heard him on the phone that morning, his voice carrying that particular tone of satisfaction he got when a deal was about to close. "Everything is finally coming together," he'd told someone. "Nothing can stop this now." Richard's eyes found her through the crowd. His expression didn't change. It never did in public. But Amanda had spent 23 years learning to read the microscopic shifts in her father's face, the slight tightening around his eyes, the barely perceptible straightening of his shoulders. He was watching her, waiting to see what she'd do, and she knew with sudden, crystalline clarity that this moment mattered in ways she couldn't yet understand. Rosa's tears had started to fall, cutting clean tracks through the foundation someone had applied to cover the tiredness that lived permanently in foster children's faces. The girl's hands were shaking so violently the paper plate rattled. She looked like she wanted to disappear, to sink through the marble floor and never come back. And something in that expression reached through the years and grabbed Amanda by the throat. She remembered being 7. Not the version of 7 that appeared in family photographs, all professional smiles and coordinated outfits, but the real version. The version that had spilled grape juice on her mother's white carpet during one of these same insufferable events, and had watched her mother's face transform into something cold and terrible. "You have responsibilities," her mother had hissed, gripping her arm hard enough to leave marks hidden under long sleeves. "People are always watching us. We don't get to be careless." But there had been someone else that day. Someone who'd found her crying in the bathroom afterward. One of the catering staff, a woman named Maria who'd knelt down and whispered that mistakes were just proof you were trying, that being perfect was the loneliest thing in the world. Maria had been fired the next day for leaving her station, and Amanda had never forgotten the kindness or the cost. The photographers were circling now, professional cameras mixing with phones, all of them waiting for the explosion. Society columnists who'd write tomorrow's takedown pieces, influencers who'd turn her reaction into content, board members who'd judge whether she had the temperament to eventually join Sterling Enterprises. Everyone had written her script already. Everyone knew exactly how this scene was supposed to play. Amanda looked at Rosa's terrified face, at the chocolate smeared across her own ruined dress, at her father's watching eyes. She thought about Maria, about kindness and cost, about the weight of expectations she'd carried since birth. She thought about who she was supposed to be and who she actually wanted to become. Then she made her choice. Amanda knelt down slowly, the destroyed Valentino pooling around her on marble that cost more per square foot than most people's monthly rent. She was eye level with Rosa now, close enough to see the girl's pupils dilated with fear, close enough to smell the cheap shampoo from whatever group home she'd been dressed in tonight. The entire ballroom held its breath. "Hey," Amanda said softly, reaching out to touch Rosa's trembling hand. "It's okay. Accidents happen." Rosa's eyes went wide with disbelief. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. "I actually hated this dress," Amanda continued. And it wasn't entirely a lie. She'd hated the fitting, hated the way the designer had talked about her body like it was a problem to be solved, hated the expectation that $6,000 of fabric would somehow make her more valuable. "You know what? I think the chocolate actually improves it. Makes it more interesting." A small, broken laugh escaped Rosa's throat, more sob than sound. Amanda pulled the girl into a hug, feeling small arms wrapped desperately around her neck, feeling tears soak into the already ruined silk. The cameras exploded with light, capturing every angle, but Amanda wasn't thinking about the photos anymore. She was thinking about the way Rosa's heart hammered against her chest like a trapped bird, about how terrifying it must be to exist in spaces where you don't belong, where one mistake might send you back to somewhere worse. When Amanda finally pulled back, Rosa was staring at her with something like worship. "I'm so sorry," the girl whispered. "I'm not," Amanda said, and meant it. She stood, still holding Rosa's hand, and turned to face the ballroom. The crowd's expression had shifted from anticipation to confusion to something softer, something almost disappointed that they wouldn't get their scandal after all. Scattered applause began, then swelled. The kind of applause people give when they've witnessed something unexpected, and aren't quite sure how to process it. Amanda smiled her public smile, the one she'd perfected over years of practice, and looked toward her father. Richard Sterling was no longer watching her. He was staring at Viktor Kozlov, whose face had gone carefully blank, in that way powerful men's faces go when they're recalculating everything. Viktor set down his champagne glass with deliberate precision, and Amanda felt the temperature in the room shift, like weather changing before a storm. The moment spiraled outward in ways Amanda couldn't track, spreading through the ballroom in whispers and glances, and the quiet chime of notifications as guests checked their phones. She walked Rosa back to the children's wing, ignoring the chocolate footprints they left on priceless carpet, listening to the girl chatter nervously about her foster mother Margaret and the community center where she took art classes, and how she'd never been anywhere as fancy as this before. A volunteer coordinator apologized profusely, but Amanda waved her off, focusing instead on making sure Rosa knew she wasn't in trouble, that sometimes beautiful things were less important than kind ones. By the time Amanda returned to the main ballroom, her phone was vibrating constantly. Text messages from friends, notifications from social media apps she rarely opened, missed calls from her publicist. She ducked into her mother's old office, the one Richard had preserved exactly as it was when she died 3 years ago. A shrine to the woman who'd taught Amanda how to smile through anything, and finally looked at her screen. The photo was everywhere. A freelance photographer named Gary Chen had captured the exact moment of the embrace. Amanda in her destroyed designer gown kneeling on marble, Rosa clinging to her with desperate relief. The contrast between wealth and poverty rendered in perfect composition. It was beautiful in that accidental way that staged photos never achieved, raw and real, and precisely the kind of content that made people believe humanity might not be entirely broken. The caption Gary had written was simple: Heiress Amanda Sterling shows grace under pressure at Sterling Foundation Gala. It had been shared 40,000 times in 30 minutes. The comments section overflowed with praise, with people calling Amanda compassionate and down-to-earth, and everything her carefully managed public image had tried to project but never quite achieved. Influencers were already reposting it with their own commentary about wealth and kindness and the importance of treating everyone with dignity. Amanda sat down in her mother's chair, still wearing the ruined dress, and felt something crack open in her chest. This was what they wanted from her. Not perfection, but humanity. Not polish, but authenticity. For years, she'd been performing a role that left her exhausted and empty, and one unplanned moment of genuine connection had given people exactly what they'd been hungry for all along. Her phone buzzed with a call from her father. She let it go to voicemail. Outside the office, the gala continued, but something had shifted. Amanda could hear it in the cadence of conversation, in the way people's voices carried differently through the door. She pulled up her laptop, her mother's laptop, technically, which Richard had never cleared, and did something she'd been avoiding all week. She searched for information about the Riverside Development Project, the deal her father and Viktor Kozlov were signing tomorrow morning. The public-facing materials were impressive. Luxury condominiums, mixed-use commercial space, a partnership between Sterling Enterprises and Kozlov International that would transform a neglected neighborhood into something modern and profitable. The press releases emphasized job creation and economic revitalization, using the kind of language that made displacement sound like opportunity. But Amanda had grown up in boardrooms. She knew how to read between the lines of corporate language, how to find the truth hiding in footnotes and appendix documents. She started digging deeper, pulling property records and environmental assessments and city council meeting minutes. Her mother had taught her this during those brief years when she'd tried to involve Amanda in the family business. "Always look at what they're not saying," her mother had whispered. "The real story lives in the documents nobody expects you to read." An hour later, Amanda understood why Viktor Kozlov had traveled from Moscow specifically to partner with Richard Sterling. Why this deal, after 18 months of negotiation, was finally happening. Why her father had been so focused, so determined, so absolutely convinced that nothing could stop it now. The Riverside district sat on contaminated industrial land. A chemical plant had operated there in the 70s and 80s, before regulations tightened, and the soil contained heavy metals at levels that made development complicated and expensive. The cleanup costs alone would run into tens of millions of dollars, eating profit margins until the project became financially unviable. Unless the land was classified as residential instead of commercial. Unless someone with the right political connections could push the permits through before anyone looked too closely at soil samples. Unless 40 families living in the existing low-income housing could be displaced before they had time to organize resistance. Amanda's hands had gone cold. She clicked through more documents, finding the housing complex that would be demolished first. Riverside Community Homes, a foster care facility and affordable housing project that currently housed 73 people, including dozens of children. She scrolled through photos on the facility's website, looking at smiling faces and art projects and testimonials from families grateful to have found stability. In one photo, she saw Rosa. The office door opened without knocking. Richard Sterling stepped inside, closing it quietly behind him. He'd removed his tuxedo jacket, and his bow tie hung loose around his neck. He looked older than she'd ever seen him, the careful construction of his public face finally showing cracks. "That was quite a performance," he said. "It wasn't a performance." Amanda didn't turn away from the laptop screen. She was scared. "I helped her." "I know." Richard moved closer, his eyes catching on the open documents. His expression flickered. Surprise, then resignation, then something harder. "You've been doing research?" "The Riverside Project." Amanda finally looked at him. "You're going to displace those families. Put them on contaminated land. 40 families, Dad, including the one Rosa lives with. The land is safe enough for residential use. We have the environmental assessments. You have assessments that were paid for by your legal team." Amanda's voice stayed level, but something hot and terrible was building in her chest. "I found the independent survey, the one the city commissioned before you got it buried. The soil is toxic. Those families will get sick. Their children will get sick." Richard was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the gala was winding down. Guests departing in town cars and Ubers, probably still talking about the viral photo of his daughter embracing a foster child. The irony was so sharp it could draw blood. "Viktor needs this deal," Richard finally said. "His developments in Russia have all failed environmental reviews. He's leveraged everything on this partnership. If I pull out now, he'll be ruined. And we'll lose $4 billion and every ounce of international credibility I've spent 30 years building." "So you'll sacrifice those families instead?" "I'll relocate them. I've already drawn up plans." "Show me the budget line." Amanda gestured at the laptop. "Show me where in these contracts you've allocated money for safe relocation." Richard's silence was answer enough. Amanda stood, her destroyed dress rustling, chocolate still staining the silk in patterns that looked almost artistic in the office's soft lighting. She thought about Rosa's terrified face, about the way the girl had clung to her like Amanda was the only safe thing in a dangerous world. She thought about her mother, who'd sat in this same chair and made these same calculations and chosen silence every single time. "I know what you're planning to do to those families," Amanda said quietly, "and I know why Viktor needs you specifically. If you sign that contract tomorrow, I'll go public with everything." Her father's face transformed into something she'd never seen before. Not anger, something worse, something that looked almost like fear. "Amanda," he said, his voice dropping low, "you have no idea what you're threatening to destroy." But she did. She absolutely did. And across town, in a small apartment in the Riverside district, Rosa was probably already asleep, dreaming about crystal chandeliers and the kind woman who'd told her that accidents were okay, completely unaware that her chocolate cake had just lit the fuse that would explode everything. Richard didn't sleep that night. Neither did Amanda. They sat in his private study, the real one, not the showpiece office where he took meetings, surrounded by leather-bound books nobody read, and a fireplace that burned actual wood because Richard Sterling believed in the symbolism of old money. The contracts for the Riverside development sat on his desk between them like a loaded gun. "You want to know the truth?" Richard poured himself scotch from a crystal decanter, his hands perfectly steady. "Your mother knew about deals like this. Every single one. The harbor development that displaced 200 families. The warehouse district that we bought from owners who didn't understand what their property was worth. The foundation you love so much. The scholarships you personally administer to students who cry and thank you for changing their lives. All of it funded by these same compromises." Amanda felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You're lying." "I'm not." Richard pulled out a leather journal from his desk drawer, her mother's handwriting covering the pages. "She kept records. She wanted you to understand, eventually, that this is how empires work. You think we're different from the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, the Kennedys? Every fortune has blood in its foundation. The only question is whether you're willing to look at it." He slid the journal across the desk. Amanda opened it with shaking hands, recognizing her mother's precise script, seeing dates and property names and amounts. Notes about families relocated, about environmental reports modified, about city officials whose campaigns received timely donations. Years of decisions, all made in rooms like this one, all justified by the good work the money eventually funded. She stayed silent, Richard continued, because she understood that idealism is a luxury. "You want to save 40 families in Riverside? Fine, I'll relocate them, but not to contaminated land. You're right about that. I'll move them to other properties we own, safe ones. They'll have better housing than they have now. Rosa's community center will get a new facility, fully funded. Margaret's foster program will receive a 5-year grant that ensures stability." Amanda looked up from the journal. "What's the catch?" "You stay silent about the environmental issues. Victor signs the deal tomorrow. We develop Riverside exactly as planned, but the families are already gone, already safe, already grateful for the upgrade. Everyone wins. It was so reasonable, so clean, so exactly like the compromises her mother had made, over and over, until she'd become someone who could sleep at night knowing what she knew." Amanda thought about Rosa's face, about Margaret trying to keep foster children safe in a world that treated them as disposable, about 40 families who deserved better than to be bargaining chips in games played by people who'd never know their names. "Show me the relocation budget," Amanda said. "In writing? Legal commitment, not a promise." Richard's expression shifted, just slightly. "It's being drawn up. You're lying." The realization hit her like cold water. "There is no relocation budget. There never was. You're telling me what I want to hear, so I'll stay quiet until after the contracts are signed. And then those families will be displaced with nowhere to go. You'll bury the story, pay off whoever needs to be paid off. And by the time anyone realizes what happened, Victor will be back in Moscow, and you'll be $4 billion richer." "Amanda, how much did the last family get? The harbor development? What did you actually give them?" She was flipping through her mother's journal now, finding the entry, reading the numbers. 30 days notice and moving costs. That's it. 30 days to find new housing in a city where affordable housing doesn't exist. And you called it relocation assistance. Richard stood, moving to the window overlooking the city. Manhattan glittered below them, millions of lights representing millions of lives, most of them struggling to survive in spaces between buildings owned by men like him. "You think this is easy? You think I enjoy these decisions? I'm trying to run a company that employs 3,000 people, that supports families, that funds the foundation doing actual good in the world. Sometimes you have to sacrifice the few for the many. That's leadership. That's cowardice. Amanda closed the journal. You're asking me to become mom? To make her choices? To learn to sleep at night knowing what I know? I'm asking you to grow up. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and final. Amanda thought about the viral photos still spreading across the internet, about strangers praising her compassion while she sat in this room negotiating away the safety of the same families she'd accidentally become a symbol for. The irony was suffocating. I need to think, she said. Richard checked his watch. You have until midnight. Victor's lawyers are waiting for my call. If I don't confirm by then, he walks away from the deal. $4 billion evaporates. Our international expansion dies. Every investor who believed in this partnership will lose faith in my ability to close deals. The company's stock will tank. 3,000 employees will feel it. The foundation's endowment will take a hit. This isn't just about 40 families, Amanda. It's about thousands of people whose lives depend on our stability. She had 1 hour. Amanda left her father's study and drove to Riverside, her ruined dress still on because she hadn't thought to change. Chocolate stains now dried into stiff patches that cracked when she moved. The neighborhood was quiet at 11 at night. Streetlights casting yellow pools on sidewalk cracks. Corner stores still open behind security glass. The kind of area that people like her only saw through car windows on the way to somewhere else. Riverside Community Homes was a 3-story brick building that had probably been nice in the 70s, before decades of deferred maintenance and insufficient funding turned it into the kind of place where people lived because they had no other options. But someone had planted flowers in the front beds. Someone had painted a mural on the side wall, children's handprints in bright colors surrounding words that read, "Home is where we take care of each other." Amanda rang the bell. A woman answered, mid-40s, exhaustion written into the lines around her eyes, wearing scrubs that suggested she'd just come from a night shift. Her face shifted through confusion, recognition, then surprise when she realized she was looking at the girl from the viral photo. "You're Amanda Sterling," the woman said. "I am." "Are you Margaret?" "How did you—" Margaret stopped, understanding dawning. "Rosa told you about me. Can we talk? Please." "It's important." Margaret let her in. The building smelled like industrial cleaner and cooking spices, and the particular scent of too many people living in too little space. They walked past a common room where a teenager was doing homework at a scarred table, past a bulletin board covered in children's artwork and appointment reminders, and a flyer for a community meeting about upcoming changes to Riverside, Your Rights. Margaret's office was tiny, crammed with filing cabinets and a desk covered in case files. "Rosa hasn't stopped talking about you," Margaret said, gesturing for Amanda to sit. "She thinks you're some kind of fairy godmother. You made her feel like she mattered?" "She does matter." Amanda's throat felt tight. "That's why I'm here. The development project. The one that's going to demolish this building. Did you know the land is contaminated?" Margaret's expression went carefully blank. "Where did you hear that?" "I found the environmental reports. The real ones. If you're relocated to the new housing they're planning, your families will be living on toxic soil. The children will get sick." "I know." Margaret's voice was flat, defeated. "We've known for 3 weeks. Your father's company sent representatives. They offered us the new housing, made it sound like an upgrade. But I requested the environmental data, and they kept stalling, so I did my own research. Found a graduate student who owed me a favor, someone studying environmental science. She pulled the historical records. That land is poisoned." Amanda felt the world tilt. "You already know. Why haven't you gone public?" "Because I have 73 people depending on me and nowhere else to take them." Margaret's hands were shaking now, her composure cracking. "You know how hard it is to find housing for 40 families on our budget? Impossible. The waiting lists are years long. If I fight this development, your father's lawyers will bury us in legal fees until we collapse. If I stay quiet, at least they're offering some compensation. Maybe I can negotiate for better terms. Maybe I can get enough money to move everyone somewhere actually safe. I'm trying to play the game by their rules because those are the only rules that exist. My father visited here, Amanda said, remembering a detail from the documents. Last week, he took measurements, smiled at the children, told us how excited he was to provide us with better housing. Margaret laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Rosa showed him her art project. He told her she was talented. The whole time, he knew exactly what he was planning to do to us. Amanda looked at the case files stacked on Margaret's desk, each one representing a person who'd already been failed by every system designed to protect them. Foster children who'd aged out of care with nowhere to go, families escaping abuse, single mothers working 3 jobs, all of them living in this building because it was the only place that would take them. And now, even this inadequate shelter was being taken away. I can stop the deal, Amanda heard herself say. I have information that would make Viktor Kozlov walk away. But my father said if I do that, the company suffers, the foundation suffers, thousands of people lose their stability. He made it sound like I'd be choosing 40 families over 3,000 employees. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. And you came here because you wanted me to tell you what the right choice is. To make it easier. I don't know what to do. Yes, you do. Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. You already know. You're just scared to do it because it'll cost you everything. Your relationship with your father, your inheritance, your place in the world you were born into. That's what real choices cost. Not the easy ones where everyone wins, but the hard ones where you have to decide who you are when nobody's taking your picture. Amanda's phone buzzed. 15 minutes until midnight. She looked at Margaret. At this woman who'd been fighting impossible battles with insufficient resources, who stayed awake at night worrying about children who weren't hers by blood, but were hers by choice. She thought about her mother's journal, about years of compromises that had slowly transformed her into someone who could justify anything. She thought about Rosa's terrified face and her own reflection in a child's eyes, seeing herself as someone worth believing in. The viral photo, Amanda said slowly. It's been shared hundreds of thousands of times. People think I'm compassionate, kind. What if I told them the truth? What if I showed them what my family is really planning to do to the neighborhood where that little girl actually lives? Margaret's expression shifted. Your father would destroy you. Probably. Amanda pulled out her phone. But he can't destroy all of us. And I'm betting there are lawyers who take this case pro bono just for the publicity. Environmental contamination, corporate negligence, exploitation of vulnerable families. This is the kind of story that makes careers. She had 10 minutes. Amanda opened her contacts and started making calls. Amanda didn't call the press. She did something Viktor Kozlov never anticipated. She called his wife. It had taken her 7 minutes of frantic internet searching while Margaret watched with growing alarm. But Amanda found what she needed. Mrs. Natasha Kozlov ran a children's health charity in Moscow called Clean Future Foundation. Established 5 years ago after the Kozlov's daughter Anastasia had been diagnosed with leukemia. The foundation's website featured Natasha's personal story. How they'd discovered that industrial contamination near their home had poisoned the water supply, how Anastasia had survived after brutal treatment, how Natasha had dedicated her life to preventing other children from suffering the same way. The website listed a contact email. Amanda composed a message in 3 minutes, attaching every document she'd found. The environmental reports showing soil contamination levels, the permits that had been expedited through Richard's political connections, the housing records showing that 73 people, including 42 children, were about to be relocated onto poisoned land. She included photos from the Riverside Community Homes website, making sure Rosa's face was visible. She wrote, "Mrs. Kozlov, my name is Amanda Sterling. In 2 hours, your husband plans to sign a development deal with my father that will do to American children exactly what was done to your daughter. I found your foundation's mission statement. No child should suffer for adult greed. I'm asking you to hold your husband to those words. This isn't business. This is choosing profit over children's lives. You survived this nightmare once. Please don't let it happen again because your family is on the other side of it." She hit send at 11:53 p.m. For 2 minutes, nothing happened. Amanda sat in Margaret's office, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat, wondering if she'd just made the stupidest decision of her life. Margaret had her hand on the phone, ready to start calling the legal aid lawyers she knew, preparing for the fight they were about to face. Then Amanda's phone rang. "Unknown number, international prefix." She answered. "Miss Sterling?" The voice was female, accented, tight with barely controlled rage. "This is Natasha Kozlov. I just read your email. Tell me you're lying. Tell me these documents are fabricated." "I wish I could." Amanda's voice was shaking. "But they're real, all of it. And in 7 minutes, unless someone stops it, your husband is going to sign contracts that make him complicit in poisoning 42 children." She heard Natasha's breath catch. "Victor told me this was a clean development. Luxury housing. He showed me architectural renderings. He said this was his chance to build something legitimate in America, to move past the failures in Russia. He lied to you the same way my father lied to me." Amanda looked at Margaret, at the filing cabinets full of families who'd already been failed by every institution that claimed to protect them. "Mrs. Kozlov, you have the power to stop this. One phone call from you and Victor walks away. He built his reputation on being the developer who learned from tragedy. If you threaten to go public, to tell your story and connect it to what he's doing here, he'll have to back out. His entire image depends on being the man who would never hurt children after what happened to your daughter." Silence, long enough that Amanda thought the call had dropped. Then, "He's in New York, in a hotel room with his lawyers, waiting to sign your father's contracts." Natasha's voice had gone cold and focused. "I'm calling him now. If what you've sent me is true, Miss Sterling, then my husband is about to learn that I don't forgive this twice." The line went dead. Amanda looked at her phone. 11:55 p.m. 5 minutes until midnight. She pulled up the tracking on her email, saw that Natasha had already forwarded the documents to someone, multiple people, judging by the forward count that kept climbing. Within seconds, Amanda's phone buzzed with a news alert. Environmental advocacy groups were already posting about the Riverside development, about the Sterling Kozlov partnership, about contaminated land and displaced families. Natasha had sent the documents to journalists, to activists, to everyone in her considerable network of people who devoted their lives to protecting children from corporate negligence. The story was out. There was no containing it now. Margaret's office phone rang. She answered, listened for a moment, then looked at Amanda with wide eyes. "That was our legal aid attorney. He just got forwarded your documents from 3 different sources. He's bringing in partners. They're taking the case pro bono." She covered the receiver. "What did you do?" "I made it impossible for anyone to bury this." Amanda's hands were still shaking, but her voice was steady. "Now we fight." At 11:58 p.m., Richard Sterling's name appeared on Amanda's phone. She answered. "What have you done?" Her father's voice was barely recognizable, rage and panic mixing into something raw and terrible. "Victor just called off the deal. He's flying back to Moscow tonight. $4 billion, Amanda. Gone. Because you couldn't keep quiet for 1 more hour. Because I couldn't stay silent while you poisoned children." Amanda stood, walking to Margaret's window, looking out at the riverside neighborhood her family had planned to sacrifice. Did you really think I'd become mom? That I'd learn to sleep at night knowing what I knew? You've destroyed everything. The company's reputation, our international standing, the foundation's credibility. No, Dad, you destroyed it. Years ago, with every compromise, every family you displaced, every environmental report you buried. I'm just the one who finally stopped pretending it was okay. She took a breath. The story's public now. Environmental groups have the documents. Legal aid attorneys are taking the case. You can't bury this one. Richard was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, gone flat and distant. You're no longer welcome in the family home. Your trust fund will be contested. Every door I ever opened for you is closed. You understand that? I do. And surprisingly, Amanda found she was okay with it. Terrified, but okay. What I don't understand is how you live with yourself. Her father hung up. Amanda stood in the quiet office, still wearing her ruined Valentino gown, chocolate stains now part of the fabric's history, listening to Margaret make phone calls to the families, telling them they had a fighting chance now, that someone had finally chosen them over profit margins. The next 72 hours were chaos. The story exploded across every news outlet. Environmental groups versus corporate interests, with Amanda's viral photo providing the perfect ironic frame. The heiress who'd shown compassion to a foster child, then discovered that same child was about to be poisoned by her family's business deal. Viktor Kozlov released a statement condemning the environmental negligence and distancing himself from Sterling Enterprises. Natasha Kozlov gave interviews about corporate accountability and protecting children, her daughter's story lending moral weight that no amount of PR could counter. Richard Sterling faced investigations from environmental agencies and city officials whose previous cooperation suddenly evaporated under public scrutiny. The foundation's board demanded his resignation. Company shareholders filed lawsuits. The empire he'd spent 30 years building began to crack along fault lines that had always existed, but that everyone had agreed to ignore as long as the money kept flowing. And in the middle of it all, Richard did something Amanda never expected. He called a press conference. She watched it from Margaret's office, surrounded by families who'd gathered to see what would happen next. Her father stood at a podium looking older than she'd ever seen him, the careful construction of his public face finally, completely gone. He announced that Sterling Enterprises was commissioning a full environmental audit of the Riverside district, funded entirely by the family's personal wealth rather than company money. The families would not be relocated. The development would not proceed until the land was properly remediated. He was selling his majority stake in the development company and stepping down from active leadership of Sterling Enterprises. My daughter, Richard said, his voice rough, showed me something I'd forgotten. That the cost of success isn't worth anything if you lose your humanity in the process. I can't undo the choices I've made, but I can stop making them. This is a beginning, not redemption. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope to deserve it someday. Amanda watched tears stream down her face as she finally understood what her mother never had. That admitting you were wrong was harder than staying wrong. That changing course required more courage than staying the path. That sometimes the only way to save what mattered was to let everything else burn. She moved out of the family mansion that week and took an apartment in Riverside. Not for optics, the press attention had already moved on to the next scandal, but because Margaret needed help with rent, and because Rosa asked if they could do art projects together, and because running from privilege wasn't the answer. Confronting it was. Using it was. Dismantling it piece by piece and rebuilding something better from the wreckage. The viral photo still circulated months later, but now people knew the full story. The heiress in the destroyed designer gown, the foster child with chocolate on her fingers. The split-second decision that cost $4 billion and saved 42 children from being slowly poisoned by adult greed. The cake that accidentally shattered an empire and revealed what had been hiding in its foundation all along. On a Tuesday afternoon in November, Amanda sat on the front steps of Riverside Community Homes with Rosa, helping her with homework, while Margaret coordinated with environmental engineers about the remediation schedule. The building would be renovated properly now, the families could stay, and the community they'd built wouldn't be torn apart for profit margins. Rosa looked up from her math worksheet, her expression serious. "People at school say your dad was bad, that you stopped him from hurting us." Amanda thought about that, about her father who was trying to change and maybe failing, but at least trying, about the years of compromises that had slowly destroyed her mother, about the weight of family legacy and the courage it took to choose differently. "He made bad choices," she finally said, "but he's trying to make better ones now. That's what matters. Not where you start, but what you do when you realize you've been going the wrong way." "Like when I dropped the cake?" "Exactly like that. Except your accident saved a lot of people. Including me." Rosa smiled and went back to her homework. Amanda watched the street. This neighborhood she'd been taught to drive past without seeing, now seeing it clearly. The community garden someone had started in an empty lot. The corner store owner who let people run tabs when money was tight. The teenager teaching younger kids to skateboard. The small acts of care that existed in places where people couldn't afford to be careless with each other. Her phone buzzed. A message from her father. "Can we talk?" "Not business. Just us." Amanda looked at the message for a long moment, then at Rosa working on fractions, then at the mural on the building's side wall with its handprints and its simple truth. "Home is where we take care of each other." She typed back, "Yes, but here. You come to Riverside." His response came seconds later. "I'll be there in an hour." Amanda put her phone away and helped Rosa with her math, the afternoon sun warm on her face, chocolate stains long since washed out of the Valentino gown she'd donated to a charity auction. The dress had sold for $12,000, twice its original price, with all proceeds going to foster care programs. Apparently ruined things were worth more when they came with good stories. The cake hadn't destroyed her father's empire. Human connection had. The willingness to see Rosa as a person rather than collateral damage, to value 42 children's health over $4 billion, to choose uncomfortable truth over comfortable lies. That was the real lesson the viral photo had taught. That every empire built on compromises would eventually face someone who refused to compromise, and that sometimes the smallest person in the room had the power to topple everything. Rosa finished her homework and ran inside to show Margaret. Amanda sat alone on the steps, waiting for her father, ready for whatever came next. The evening air smelled like rain and distant cooking and possibility. Somewhere in the building behind her, children were laughing. It was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard.